everybody. Welcome back to the I Play 2 podcast. I'm your host, Rob Adler. This week, former college and NBA player Drew Barry joins the show. As a freshman at Georgia Tech, he made the All-ACC tournament team, and by the time he left the Yellow Jackets, Drew was their all-time assist leader, a record he still holds over a quarter century later. After playing a couple seasons in the NBA, Drew also played internationally in Germany, Italy, and Poland. His father, Rick Barry, was the 1975 NBA Finals MVP and is enshrined in the Basketball Hall of Fame. Drew, welcome to the show.
Hey, Rob, thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. My first question, kind of an obvious one here, but how did your love of basketball come to be?
I was born into it with a father that was playing professionally at the time, 4 older brothers. It was just there. I remember all my brothers and myself being ball boys for the Warriors and the Rockets. So I was introduced to basketball at a very, very, very early age.
What was it like growing up in a basketball locker room?
It was cool. I mean, I think for me, I didn't know any different. So it was normal to meet Clifford Ray and Jamal Wilkes and Alvin Adels and all these players. And then as I got a little bit older, I was fortunate enough with my brother Brent, where my dad was doing all the All-Star Weekend announcing, and he would announce the dunk contest and three-point contest. So we would go to the All-Star Weekend, and I would go into the locker room and meet Dr. J and Kareem and Jordan and Isaiah and Magic. It was normal. It didn't seem something that was abnormal. So it was really cool looking back on it to be able to do those kind of things growing up.
Out of all the folks you met, who was the one that you enjoyed meeting the most?
I've had experiences with so many of them, but when I was younger, Jamal Wilkes was my favorite player. So he played with my dad on the Warriors. And I remember as a kid, they always had these security blankets and stuffed animals or whatever. And I had a blanket, and I gave my blanket to Jamal Wilkes when I was like 3 years old. So I would say that he was one of my favorite guys. I also remember Calvin Murphy. He was tons of energy, super nice, very outgoing, very friendly. I remember him when he was in Houston with my dad as well. Those two would be it.
First NBA game I saw as a kid had Calvin Murphy in it, and I was like, who is the midget?
Yeah, he was tiny, but he was super fast and quick and could shoot the lights out.
Growing up with brothers, not necessarily just basketball related, but how competitive were all of you?
I would say uber competitive. Scooter being the oldest, and then John, then Brent, and then myself. So it would always be Scooter and Brent versus John and me. So we had lots of 2-on-2 battles. And I don't necessarily know that we ever finished a game, because I think a fight would break out before you would get to the final, because nobody wanted to lose. And if you had a fight, you had to break up the kids and didn't get to finish the game, then no one won or lost. So there was a lot of fighting, but it wasn't just in basketball. It was just in everything. I mean, we would play sharks and the minnows in the pool at night in the dark, and we'd play Scrabble. We'd play board games. So the competitive gene that my father passed down and my mother passed down were definitely in the DNA.
Who's the best Scrabble player amongst you?
Gosh, actually, my dad is really good, but I don't know. I think Scooter was really good, but he was also the oldest, so he was a little bit smarter than all of us.
What's it like to grow up in a household like that, where your dad was an NBA player, your grandfather was an NBA player, your brothers all at some point played in the NBA? Take me through all of that in terms of just how much basketball really is in the blood.
A lot of people don't know this, but yes, my grandfather, Bruce Hale, was a Hall of Fame coach at Miami, recruited my father to play for him. That's how my dad met my mother. My mother was Bruce Hale's daughter. So he was ahead of his time. He was very instrumental in getting the three-point line into basketball. So he had a tremendous amount of knowledge and experience in basketball. And then my father, who was one of the 50 best NBA players of all time, that kind of speaks for itself. It was normal. So when you wake up every day and that's your dad and that's what you do, it's normal. So when friends would come over and they'd see my dad or whatever, they would be a little bit starstruck or shell shocked. And for me, it just was normal. So it didn't seem very different. I think as I got older, I started to realize it was a little bit of a different upbringing. I remember mostly towards eighth grade high school, where every time I'd walk into a gym to play a game, everybody would be like, which one's Rick Barry's son? And they just expected me to be the best player on the court and dominate out there. And that started to come more in high school. So that's where I really started to see, oh, wow, this is different. My dad was really, really good at basketball, and all my brothers were really good, and I'm pretty good. And so this may be something that I need to pursue.
How hard was it for you to create your own identity to be known as Drew Barry and not Rick Barry's son?
I think growing up, I was very much trying to be the opposite of my dad. My dad was a superstar NBA player, very confident, arrogant in a way, but that arrogance is what made him so successful on the court. I think I tried to be the opposite of that. Be hard to explain, but I think I did lack confidence because I was trying so hard not to be this cocky, arrogant kid that was Rick Barry's son and he thought he was cool and the best. And I was more trying to be the opposite of that. And even to this day, I don't even talk about my family, my background, unless someone brings it up. I don't ever bring it up. I think I've been a little bit reserved and a little bit more humble with that. So I think that was probably one way I tried to differentiate myself and make my own name, was not really touting my name, right? That makes sense.
It does. And you mentioned a little bit about your dad's perceived arrogance. Did that ever cause a problem?
There's been so many things written about my dad, said about my dad, and he was a hothead. He was very intense. He was uber competitive. All those things that they write about and say about, he was abrasive. All those things are what made him the player he was. So you take those things away from him, he's not the same player. And it just kind of comes with the territory. So sometimes I think my dad was misunderstood because he was so driven and such a competitor and wanting to win so much that he would step on anyone's neck to win. He would do anything he had to do to win. And sometimes that rubbed people the wrong way. And he was very opinionated and voiced his opinion. And sometimes that got him in some hot water. And I think he's learned from all that, but he wasn't a bad guy. But yeah, there were a lot of things written poorly. There was an article in Sports Illustrated about the family, and it was supposed to be about Rick Barry and his four sons that all got Division I basketball scholarships and how they are doing and what's going on. And then the interview went, and it was just a total slam on my dad. And the title of it was Daddy Dearest. So it was pretty bad. But my dad is a very, very good guy. He's got a great heart. He's just competitive, and he just wants to win at anything he does. It could be Scrabble, categories. Now he's doing pickleball. He's just intense. That's what makes him so great.
My dad and your dad should have a pickleball battle. My dad's pretty good at it as well.
Oh, really?
My dad plays pickleball 4 or 5 times a week, but he says he plays for fun, but I know he's a little more competitive than that.
How old is he?
He's in his mid-70s.
All right. So my dad's 79, and he's like a 5'0", 79 player. His goal is to be the first person at 80 to win the Triple Crown at the Pickleball US Open, where he wins in 80-year-old singles, 80-year-old mixed doubles, and 80-year-old doubles. And he wants to win the 3 gold medals. That's his goal right now. And I just saw him last week. He was playing in Danny Werfel's pickleball celebrity thing here in Atlanta, and I went and watched. And Eric Decker and Danny and David Pollock were all there playing, and they were just amazed at 80 at what my dad could do.
You and all of your brothers played D1 hoops, as you mentioned. What was the recruiting process like for you?
For me, I was benefited from my 3 older brothers being the youngest. So the Barry family growing up was, all of us matured very late. At 16 years old, my driver's license, I was 5'9", 135 pounds. And when I finished at Georgia Tech, I was 6'5", 205. So a lot of growing late in our ages. So I was the benefit of that because Scooter ended up going to Kansas, won the national championship in 1988. And then John went to University of Pacific and then failed out and went to a Paris, Texas junior college, but ended up getting to Georgia Tech when Dennis Scott left early to go to the draft. Bobby Cremins needed two, and he ran into my dad. And long story short, John ended up playing there. And so when John was playing there, I would go out and watch games, and I got to meet the coaches. And at that time, my brother Brent had just signed at Oregon State, and I was a senior. And my stepfather was saying, look, you like John, you need to come watch Drew. So they came and watched me play and offered me a scholarship, and that's how I ended up at Georgia Tech. But I had pretty much every Pac-10 school recruiting me except for Arizona. They had signed Damon Stoudemire and Khalid Reeves. And then Kansas, Roy Williams offered me a scholarship, but I didn't want to go play in Kansas, and a lot of other mid-major schools. But Georgia Tech, when they offered, that's where I knew I wanted to go.
What was it like meeting Bobby Cremins for the first time? Because he's kind of an ACC coaching legend.
Growing up on the West Coast, I didn't have much exposure to Georgia Tech and the ACC. So I started watching John play. And at that time, Kenny Anderson was playing for Georgia Tech. So they were on television all the time because Kenny was one of the best players in the country. And so my brother John was the two guard and Kenny was the point. And I started watching, and I remember coming to Georgia Tech and watching NC State play, and it was Chris Corciani and Rodney Monroe. And Rodney Monroe torched him for like 48 points, but the environment and the atmosphere in the stadium was just crazy. And then watching Carolina and then Duke and Wake Forest, it was like, whoa, this league is the real deal. And so seeing Bobby on the sidelines with his white hair, jumping up and down, going crazy, he wasn't intimidating at all when I met him. That's what I think was one good thing about Bobby, and probably the success he had recruiting, was he was just so personable. Every family loved him. Every player loved him. He treated you like you were his son. He made it very easy to like him, to trust him. And John had put the stamp of approval saying, you're an idiot if you don't sign here. So that was how I ended up at Georgia Tech.
Bonus points for the fire and ice reference, by the way.
Oh, yeah. Chris Corciani and Rodney.
In terms of going to Atlanta from the West Coast, how much of a culture shock was that for you?
It was a culture shock. I mean, I grew up in Northern California. I was surfing and skateboarding and playing every sport and enjoying that weather. And then I got to Atlanta, and I got here in the summer. It was like August, and it was just sweltering hot. Never felt anything like it before. And so that took a lot of adjusting. But the benefit of coming across country and going to Georgia Tech is being on a team. So you immediately have 12 new friends. So not only did I have that, I also have my brother John. So the transition was a lot easier for me, and made everything better that my brother John was there. He already knew everybody. He knew the city. He would take me around. I lived with him in the summer before school started. And then when school started, we lived together. So it made that transition very easy. But I don't think I'm used to the South and the humidity still.
Aside from your brother, who else kind of took you under their wing when you got there?
So at that time, Matt Geiger was here, and he was a 7-foot center, and he was a good player, and spent a lot of time with Matt. James Forrest and Travis Best were also the recruits when I came in, and they were top 15 recruits in the country, and we hit it off, and I spent a lot of time with those guys. But I actually made a lot of friends that were outside of the team, a lot of fraternity guys and guys from class, and spent a lot of time with pretty much everybody. But as far as the close people on the team, it was probably Geiger, James, Travis. Rod Balanas was our roommate. He was from DeMatha. He didn't play much, but he was on there. Greg White was another one. So just kind of mixed bag of who I hung out with and was close to.
As a freshman, you were a member of the All-ACC tournament team, but what stuck out from that year of getting there, playing college basketball, and being on a fairly good team?
I was fortunate that I redshirted my first year. Physically, I wasn't ready to play in the ACC. And so redshirting that first year allowed me to gain some muscle and some strength and also practice every day with these ACC level players. And I think early on I kind of struggled and was overmatched, but by the time half the season came through, I was hanging and playing very well. So that redshirt year made my first year so much easier because I kind of knew what to expect. I practiced with the guys. I went to every game. I saw it. Even though I didn't play in the games, I was right there on the bench seeing what would happen. So I was really prepared and ready for what I was going to face as a freshman because of that year sitting out. And when Kremens recruited me, he told me that I would start my junior year. And that was good enough for me. 2 years in the ACC starting would have given me a chance to try to make the NBA. And so I came off the bench for like the first 6 games of that season, my freshman year. And then he inserted me in the starting lineup. From that point on, I started every game. And so I was thrown into the fire and I was playing against these top level players, but I was holding my own and had a good year. And I remember the ACC tournament going there. James Forrest was just on fire. And I set the all-time assist record because James never missed. It was great. I was just passing him the ball every time. I made the ACC tournament team and set the assist record, and not a bad run for my first go at the ACC tournament, which was at that time, Rob, you couldn't find 3 better days of basketball and college basketball than the ACC tournament in the early 90s. It was insane.
I'd argue that it's still a pretty good tournament to this day.
A little watered down now that they've got 25 teams in the ACC, but back then it was just 9 teams and it was rivals and it was great. Just remember walking into the stadium and everybody had their colors. It was just great. And just the talent and the people that were playing in those 3 days, it was off the charts.
From someone who's only been there as a fan and working in the media, but never obviously playing there, what's it like to walk into Cameron Indoor and take the court?
It's intimidating. When you play there, when you come out, you usually get to the game an hour and a half, 2 hours before the game. You get taped, you get ready, and then you go get loose, you warm up, right? So when you're going out there and warming up, shooting, the Cameron Crazies are already there. So they're watching everything. And they're throwing tennis balls back and forth. They're talking trash and they're fired up. So immediately it's just a different environment because normally in most stadiums, nobody's there yet. So you're kind of just warming up on your own and doing your own thing. You're getting taunted from the second you walk on the court at Cameron. And then it's tiny. I like to call it like a little bowling alley because it's just very small and very quaint and everybody's on top of you. It's not the nicest building, but the Cameron Crazies, they make it very challenging. But I always thrived in places like that. I loved it. I seemed to be the one that would always take a lot of heat from the fans. I don't know why, but I do remember, Rob, one of my good memories at Cameron was my senior year, I finally won at Cameron. I was 1-3 at Cameron. So I did get one win against the Dukies at Cameron Indoor. So I can always say I did win once there. And then when I was a sophomore, I got the ball on the wing. Travis threw it up to me and I kind of had a breakaway and I went and I dunked on Cherokee Parks bad. It was a good one. And the Cameron Crazies started bowing to me saying, Barry, Barry. And they were bowing because they respected the play. The one thing about the Cameron Crazies is they're just very knowledgeable. They respect good play. They know their stats. They know things that happen. Eddie Alisma had like a drowning incident when we were in Hawaii. When we went and played there the first time when they announced him to come out, they all held up snorkels. They're advanced. It makes it a lot of fun to play there for sure.
Was that your favorite road venue to play at?
Yeah, 100%.
You had a pretty memorable game your senior year against North Carolina at North Carolina. You scored 30. I think you had 9 threes or some crazy number like that. What do you remember from that game?
I remember well. I think the beginning of the game, I shot an air ball and Kremens took me out of the game because I think it was like 6 feet behind the three, which is your normal average 3-pointer nowadays. But back in my day, that was a bad shot. And he took me on the bench and he's like, "What are you doing? That's too far. Get your head right." And he had me sit there for like a minute and then he put me back in. And then when he put me back in, I think I made like my next 7 threes. Carolina played zone. They did not play man to man. So I was 9 for 18. I shot 18 threes in one game. And normally I wasn't a shooter. I was an assist guy. I was a playmaker. For me to shoot 18 threes in one game was a lot. I mean, normally I'd take maybe 3, 4, but I was firing them up that day. And luckily a lot of them went in. And we ended up winning that game. And Dick Vitale was announcing on ESPN. And I got interviewed after the game. And that game was on a Saturday. And that night was the slam dunk contest. And my brother Brent was in it. And I remember telling Dickie V and everyone, I said, put your money on Brent Berry winning the dunk contest tonight. And he ended up winning the dunk contest that night. So it was a good day for the Berry family.
No kidding. That day, just unbelievable that you and Brent could have your own moment totally separately.
One of the best compliments, Rob, I ever got was from Dean Smith after that game. I was walking up to the press and I had to get up the stairs and he was coming down. He had just finished his press conference and I was coming up and he stopped me and shook my hand. And he said, "Hey, great game." And I said, "Well, thanks for staying in zone." And he said, "Well, my guys can't guard one-on-one. They don't know how to play man-to-man defense." And I said, "Well, thankfully I hit some shots." And he said, "I need to fire all my assistant coaches." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he goes, "Well, how in the heck that we don't recruit one Barry, not only you, but any of your brothers is beyond me. You guys would have made great players at Carolina." And I told him, "Thank you very much." That was a compliment coming from one of the best coaches of all time. So that was pretty cool.
As someone who still holds the record for assists at Georgia Tech, I know it's a team record because you don't get them without your teammates, but what does that mean to you?
Honestly, it doesn't mean a whole lot. I look back at my career at Georgia Tech and I'm very proud of what I was able to accomplish, what I was able to do with our teams. I mean, we won the ACC tournament my freshman year. We won the regular season championship my senior year. So I was able to put 2 banners up in the arena. Didn't have the success in the NCAA tournament that I thought we'd have. I only got to play in the NCAA tournament twice. The other times I thought that we got looked over, but we had some injuries that impacted the NCAA's decision to take us because some guys were banged up. But all in all, I mean, it's nice that I'm in the record books and I laugh about it with my buddies because I don't think the record will ever be broken because anyone that's throwing 5, 6 assists a game for their career is got to stay for 4 years. And nowadays, nobody stays for 4 years. So I think it's going to be intact for a long time unless someone decides to stay for 4 years and forego that NBA money.
When I saw that the record was still intact, and I thought the same thing, it's going to take somebody who really wants to stay and get a degree.
I had the all-time assist record at the ACC tournament, but back then we only played 3 games. And I think I had 30 in 3 games or something. I almost averaged 10 a game. And I don't think that record stands now because they're playing 5 games. So one nice accolade, and I'm not into personal accolades, but one nice accolade was I was inducted in the Georgia Tech Hall of Fame. So that made me feel good that the school felt like I made an impact on the program and the sports there, that I was good enough to be inducted into the Hall of Fame for that consideration. And that made me feel really good.
Time to take me through that day of what it was like. I imagine that's something you remember fairly well.
I think I got the news that I was going to get inducted and it made me feel really good. I told my family and I think I was proud. From my perspective, Rob, I was not highly recruited like an All-American. I wasn't one of these 5-star guys. I was probably a 3 or 4-star recruit that ended up starting for 4 years, getting a chance to play in the NBA, getting a chance to achieve a lifelong dream. Had a good run at Tech, set some records and met a lot of good people. And so for me, I think my career was great. Did I think I was going to be in the NBA as a backup point guard for 10 years and have a good career? Yes. Did that happen? No. But that doesn't take away anything from what I had in college and the success that I had. So when I look back at it, I kind of think like I overachieved. And I think a lot of people, if they saw me in high school, would have never thought that I would have started 4 years at Georgia Tech and got to where I got. So when I look back, I can keep my head held high and know that I had a good run.
Sometimes it's just about fit, right place, right time.
100%. There were players in the NBA that I played much better than that made it for many years. And I still didn't understand how I couldn't hang on. But the NBA is a business. So you have to understand, like, sometimes it's not about basketball. Sometimes it's about a business situation. And I was drafted in the second round by Seattle. They had just went to the finals and lost to the Bulls in 1996. And I get drafted by them and go play with them in the summer, but they already have 15 guaranteed contracts on their roster. And there's only 15 players that can make it. So I was in a situation where I was trying to make a team where there was no room. And I had asked to be traded and they wouldn't trade me. And couple teams tried to trade for me and they turned them down, and I went to camp and I honestly outplayed Eric Snow. To this day, I would tell you that. Nothing against Eric, he's a great player, but he was guaranteed and I wasn't. So they kept him and they got rid of me. But Coach Carl had told me, he's like, look, I've never had to cut a player that every one of our coaches wants to keep. And he said, this is the business side of the NBA. It stinks. He said, but we have to let you go. So sometimes business comes before play. There were times where I got a chance to play. I think Bajit had it broken down to where if I played over 18 minutes, I averaged 7 points and 5 assists a game. And he said, but because I play 1 minute here and 2 minutes there, it takes my stats down to 1 point and 1 assist a game. So he tried to break it out like saying, hey, if you give him a chance to play, he's going to produce. That's what you need in the NBA. To be a successful player in the NBA, you need opportunity. And then if you get that opportunity, it's up to you to capitalize. I tell this story all the time to people. It gives a good example of what the NBA is like. Is my brother John signed his 4-year deal, got drafted in the first round, went to the Celtics. They didn't want to sign him. So they ended up trading him to Milwaukee, signs with Milwaukee, and he's with Milwaukee 4 years. And ends up not playing a ton and not a great system. And so he ends up going to the Lakers and plays with the Lakers, and he doesn't play a whole lot. And so now he's been in the NBA for 5 years and nobody wants him. Arn Tellem is our agent. He's the agent for our whole family. He has all the big players. He's got everybody. So he gets John into Sacramento's camp, and John goes to Sacramento on a non-guaranteed deal. So if he makes the team, his contract becomes guaranteed. If he doesn't, he's cut. He has got nothing. Well, he ends up making that team, and that just so happened to be the team where it's Jason Williams, Peja Stojakovic, John Barry, Corliss, Williamson, Vlade Divac, Chris Webber, Doug Christie, and they become the hottest team in the NBA. And so John finishes out his 1-year deal there, and now 20 NBA teams want to sign him. And the year before, nobody wanted him. So it just kind of gives you an idea of getting in the right situation and getting a chance to play, how it can dictate how your career is going to go.
Do you have any bitterness, not so much towards the league itself, but to kind of what happened?
No, not at all. I think everything happens for a reason, and I'm a pretty spiritual guy. I believe in God, and I know he's got a plan for everything. I don't think it was in the cards for me to be a backup player. Lenny Wilkins, when I played in Atlanta, and there was about a month that I played. Eldridge Kazner got hurt, so I backed up Mookie. So there was like a month where I got to play. And Pete Babcock, the general manager, came down to me after a couple of weeks, and he's like, man, when you play, we move the ball. It is so fun to watch. Like, it's so fun to watch you out there playing. And then Lenny Wilkins is telling me, hey, you should be a backup in this league for 10 years. But yet I never was. It was very strange how it all worked, but it all worked out for a reason. I went over to Europe, got to travel the world, got to play in some teams there, enjoyed that. But when it came to the NBA, I got tired of being on the NBA team and then every year trying to have to find another NBA team to make. I remember in Seattle, the GM had called me in at the end of the season and he said, hey, I don't think we're going to re-sign you next year. We're going to look at our options. We really want to make a push for the playoffs, and we're disappointed that we didn't make it, but we appreciate what you brought to the team this year. And I actually said to him, I said, Wally, his name was Wally Walker. And I said, Wally, you're telling me that you're not going to re-sign me because you want to make a push for the NBA. And I said, Wally, I played 500 minutes this year. My minutes don't impact if we make the playoffs or not. I'm a role player. I'm a guy that you can put in if you need them. I'm a guy that you can put on IR. I'm a guy that practices hard every day, doesn't cause a problem. And when you put him in the game, can hold his own and play well. I said, you're not replacing me with someone that can average 25 a game. That was my first experience of how the NBA works. I did everything I was supposed to do for Seattle, and I was a good teammate, good player. When I got a chance to play, I would go on injured reserve. I'd be on the active roster. I'd get put in and out of games and never complain and worked hard. And at the end of the year, I was let go. And to me, it was like, I shouldn't be let go. They should keep me. They should want to keep a player like me that they can have like that. They ended up signing Fred Vinson, who played at Georgia Tech behind me and was on my teams coming off the bench. And they signed him, and he didn't put a uniform on all year. He was on IR all year. And I told my agent, I'm like, this is what's wrong with the NBA. Why did they get rid of me? It doesn't make sense. That was the frustrations I had, but I had a great experience. My favorite players on Seattle were Detlef Schrempf and Hersey Hawkins. I mean, they were great guys. Every time we went on the road, they would take me out to eat. But there's no better job in the world than playing in the NBA. I can say that. And I didn't play much, and it was still one of the best jobs.
As a Mavericks fan, I still rue the day that they traded Detlef Schrempf for Herb Williams.
He's one of a kind. He's a pro's pro.
With kind of bouncing around, I remember that you also played, I think, in the CBA for, I want to say, Fort Wayne.
I did. The Fort Wayne Fury. Horrible experience.
Would you mind elaborating on why it was a horrible experience?
So when I was let go from Seattle, I was actually cut on the day of the first game, which I felt like was weird. So Nate McMillan was telling me, dude, you're not getting cut. You made this team. There's no way they're cutting you. And I think they let me go after the walkthrough. Coach Carl had said, look, what do you want to do? And I'm like, well, I've got two brothers that are already in the NBA. You're telling me I should have made this team. Most of the guys on the team are saying I should be playing. I said, I feel like I'm an NBA player. I want to go the best route that's going to get me to the NBA. And, well, you should go to the CBA. And he's like, I know a bunch of people there, but someone will have your rights, I'm sure, and you should go there. Or I can make calls and I can get you to a really good team in Europe. And I said, well, I think the best way to get called up is the CBA. So I went to the CBA. And I went down there and I played, and it was a very veteran team. Keith Smart was on the team. Damon Bailey was on the team, if you remember him from Indiana. Jim Farmer. There were all these guys. And so I went there and just came from going against Gary Payton every day. And now I go there to play, and I'm feeling confident and good. And the next thing I know, the coach tells me, yeah, you're not going to play. And I'm like, what? Yeah, I like to play my veterans. Wow, that was strange. I don't understand. And he said, well, we're trying to win games. So it wasn't about farming young talent and trying to get them in the NBA. It was these guys that are 6, 7 years CBA veterans that were on the team were playing that really had no chance of getting called up, but they were good players that were helping the team win, right? I always thought that the CBA was supposed to be this developmental league to try to get young talent to play. And even before that, the Florida Beach Dogs, Eric Musselman had my rights. He drafted me number 2 in the draft of the CBA. And so when I got cut, I went to West Palm Beach, where the Florida Beach Dogs were, and started training with Eric Musselman. And we were going on TV, promoting everything and doing everything. And we went through practice, and I was playing great. And he says, hey, congratulations, you made the team. And I said, that's funny. And he's like, no, what do you mean? I knew I made the team. I was one of the best players. And he's like, but you're not going to play. And he said, I don't play rookies. And so I said, well, then I need you to cut me, because I'm not going to sit here and not play. I'd like to go play. And so he cut me, and that's how I ended up at Fort Wayne. So the experience in the CBA wasn't this whole development and try to get young guys that just were on the cusp of making it into the league. Musselman was using it as his way to pile up wins and try to get into the coaching ranks, which he has. And the other guy was kind of an old school coach, and he was just very loyal to the veterans. So that's my CBA story.
Kudos on the Jim Farmer reference, another former Maverick.
There you go. Alabama. Jim Farmer was great. He's just really good looking guy. He's in great shape, jawline, all this stuff. He's cut up. He's a tremendous scorer, tremendous shooter. And so he was trying to get back around in the NBA, but he was also trying to be a country singer. So he had this mic and whole setup in the hotel room. It was hilarious. And we spent a lot of time together. He was a really nice guy.
You played internationally as well in Italy, Germany, and Poland. What was that whole experience like going to Europe and that style of game?
Europe was different in the sense of, as Americans at that time, when I first went to Europe, you could only have two Americans on a team. So you're two Americans, the expectations were that you were going to carry the team. You had to be averaging 20 plus a game and you had to be helping them win. And if you didn't, then they were going to cut you and you're not going to get paid and then you're going to be done. And so it was hard for me because my game wasn't ever scoring 18, 20 points a game and dominating. I was more a facilitator and making my teammates better and knowing where everyone's going to be and making the right plays and the right passes. Yeah, I'd scored 13, 14 points a game, but I was more of a point guard. That wasn't a scoring point guard. I was more about setting up everybody else. So it was a little bit challenging for me trying to adjust my mindset to become more selfish and more of a scorer. My first stint overseas is I went to Australia and I played for Brett Brown, who ended up going to the Spurs and then ended up head coaching the Sixers and then getting fired. I was there playing really well. I was playing on a team that had 3 Australian national team players. And then there was a American that was the 3-man and me. And so I was the point guard. And I got really frustrated because everything was for the Australian players. So the 2 guard was coming off of all the pick and rolls. I was a point guard never coming off a pick and roll. I was not really involved. It was very frustrating. And so I asked to be let go. And so Brett Brown let me go. And I went back to the States and I came back to California where I grew up. And I was there and I read in the paper that someone had gotten hurt on the Warriors and they're down to 1 point guard and they need someone. So I called my agent. I'm like, look, the Warriors need a player. I'm here. I'm in the Bay Area. Call them. Next thing you know, 2 hours later, I'm on a flight down to sign with the Warriors and I'm playing against the Clippers that night. The guaranteed deadline came in mid-February or just before February, and they let me go because they didn't want to guarantee my contract on the money. The business side came in again.
I know it was brief, but what was it like to play for the same franchise that your dad made his name at?
It was weird. I mean, obviously playing there and then seeing his jersey in the rafters was weird, but I was there for so short. It was such a little time space. It didn't really resonate. It may have been less than a month. So I'll tell you though, when I was a senior in high school, we were playing in the state tournament and we were in our sectionals. The game was at the Oakland Coliseum and I got fouled with 0.6 of a second and we were down 1. And I had a 1-on-1 to win the game. And I'm at the free throw line. And above the free throw line, if you look above the backboard, whose jersey's hanging there in the lights? My dad's. He was known for making all of his free throws and shooting underhand. And that kind of got me a little bit. I did make both free throws and we did win the game. Thank you very much, Rob.
If you hadn't have made both free throws, you'd have been in trouble.
I know, I would have not eaten that night. Look, the experience that I've had playing basketball, my career, my brothers, everybody was great. The gene pool is done. None of us have kids that are basketball players. None of us have kids that are going to be recruited. We're all dried up now. I don't know if you're going to see another Barry on the courts. We'll see.
Since you've retired, where has life taken you since?
Fortunate for me, I was always pretty academically smart. I was Dean's List at Georgia Tech. So my career came to a screeching halt because my daughter got diagnosed with cancer when she was 17 months old. And so when that happened, I completely stopped playing basketball and My wife at the time and I focused on figuring out how we're going to get her treated and what that looked like. And I couldn't be overseas playing basketball and doing that while she was going through this treatment. The first thing I did was I went to Georgia Tech and I went to the Georgia Tech Foundation, which is where all the alumni donate money and all the people that donate money to the sports programs. And I just said, hey, I need to find a job, and figured best place to start is the Alumni Association. And so just networked along and ended up landing a job that I'm in currently today. I've been at this job for 20 years. It's a sales job and was fortunate to walk into it, but I was also very fortunate to know that I was going to need to fall back on school and I was going to have a real job at some point. And been very fortunate to work at the same company for the last 20 years. It's just your typical sales job and got to grind every day to try to sail away and make some money.
I remember when we were working together, we had a brief conversation about how your daughter was doing then, and that was a lot of years ago. How is she doing now?
She's doing great. My daughter was diagnosed with a cancer called neuroblastoma. She had a softball-sized tumor that was coming off of her kidney and kind of stretched all through her abdomen and wrapped around all the arteries and stuff coming off the heart. It was crazy. And she was given a 5% chance of living to the age of 5 based on her diagnostics of the tumor, the size, the timing we found it, all these things. And like I mentioned earlier, I mean, I'm a very spiritual guy. And so I relied heavily on my faith. And because I had zero control over the outcome of what was going to happen, and just did a lot of praying and tried to let God direct me into the right way of getting her treated. And April 22nd is her cancer-free day. So this past April was her 18th year of being cancer-free. She's 20 now. So she's a walking miracle.
What advice do you have for other parents going through a similar situation with kids who have cancer?
I think the hardest thing about when you deal with that is that you just don't have any control, right? And you've got to rely on these doctors and these people to tell you what's best. But then the doctors can't tell you what to do because of malpractice and things like that. So it's like you're left to make these decisions that you know nothing about. And so it's really hard, but I would say these people that have diagnosis of children with cancer, the first thing I would advise is figure out who treats the most children of that cancer. So for me, neuroblastoma. Here in Atlanta, Scottish Rite, they have 8 cancer doctors. And they're 8 cancer doctors for kids, and they have good pediatric cancer, and they see all types of cancer, these 8 doctors. Well, then my stepfather did research and whatever, and we found out that Sloan Kettering, New York, has 8 neuroblastoma cancer doctors. They see the most cases. They operate on the most cases. Rob, if Aaron Rodgers tears his Achilles, does he just go to the local hospital and get it repaired? Or does he find out who does the most Achilles repairs of athletes and go to the best? So that would be my advice, is get your child to the best care, the person that sees the most of those cases and has the most experience. That's certainly the mindset I took. The surgeon that did my daughter's surgery after chemo and after stem cell and after all the stuff we did to try to shrink the tumor, his name was Dr. LaQualia. People fly from all over the world to have them do their operations. He's that good. And I remember walking into the surgical room as far as we could go before we had to hand my daughter off, who was already under anesthesia, so she was asleep. And we met the doctor. He just looked at me and my wife at the time and said, "Do you mind if I pray over my hands over Kylie for a successful surgery?" And right then I knew I was in a good spot.
When you found out your daughter was cancer-free, what was that moment like?
What was it like? I mean, it's unexplainable. The words can't say. I mean, there were tears, there was excitement, but then there's also a hesitancy because you know that it can come back. So we did all kinds of these treatments. We did this antibody treatment at Sloan Kettering that was and this beta testing. We threw the kitchen sink at this thing and went away, but there was always the concern that it could come back. So it was a horrible experience to have to go through, but we were fortunate and lucky that God has a plan for her and that she was able to be a survivor. And unfortunately, there's a lot of families out there that don't have the positive story that I have. And at the end of the day, we're very fortunate and lucky that she's alive and doing well. It hasn't come back. And the more years it doesn't come back, the more years that you're good. So I don't think that we're too concerned about it now.
One last question about family. We've talked a lot about your dad and your brothers, but how important was your mom in your life?
I mean, my mom raised me, so she was most important. My mom and dad got divorced when I was, 3 or 4 years old. So my mom raised me. She taught me to be a polite, loving, caring, good person. She was a hell of an athlete herself. She traveled around the country as a synchronized swimmer when she was young. She can play all the sports. She's very athletic in her own right. But my mom was an amazing woman. I mean, she raised 4 boys and a daughter on her own and had to juggle everybody's schedule, had to work, had to do everything. She was awesome. And I wouldn't be where I am today without her. She is instrumental in my life. And she doesn't get much credit because she's not the famous one, but she should get a lot of the credit.
What's a favorite story outside of the sporting realm that you have with her?
I just remember the things that I used to love. We had a house in Lake Tahoe and we'd go up there every summer, all the kids, and it was called a barge where it was like this floating piece of wood and you stood on one side, it would sink and you'd have to run to the other side, and waking up at 6 a.m. to go hydro sliding and water skiing, coming back, getting in the hot tub, having breakfast, just all those kind of stories with all the brothers playing wiffle ball on the beach and doing things as a family. That was a lot of fun.
We haven't talked much about NBA stories, so you got an NBA story or two to share for us?
I'm going to give you 2 stories. These are examples of why Michael Jordan is the greatest player of all time, and it's not even close. So I'm playing in Seattle, and Don McClain is on the team. Don McClain is a 6'10" power forward from UCLA, Pac-10's all-time leading scorer. So he's towards the end of his career, his knees are banged up, but the guy can flat out score. He can shoot threes. He could take you on the block. He was a walking bucket. So he tells me the story about Jordan, that they were filming Space Jam and they built this basketball court for Jordan to train at. And so he would have players come and they play pickup games. So all of a sudden, the Space Jam pickup games with Jordan became the spot. So guys like Dennis Rodman, Reggie Miller, Jalen Rose, like you name it, big time players were going and playing pickup on the studio lot with Jordan. And that was the way Jordan stayed in shape while he was filming. So Don said that he hadn't played basketball all summer. It'd been like 3 weeks as the season ended. He said he went down there and he played. He got picked opposite Jordan's team. And he said, Drew, it was just one of those days I couldn't miss. He's like, I was just on fire. Anything I threw up was going in. Just crazy. And I hadn't touched the ball, so it was just weird. And he said, I finished the day and I'm leaving. And Jordan said to him, hey, Don, you coming tomorrow? And Don said, no, I'm going out of town, but I'll be back. About 3.5 weeks later, he went back. And he said, when they got on the court to pick teams, Jordan said, oh, I got Don. He's on the other team. And he said that Jordan literally denied him the ball, did not let him shoot a shot, did not let him score a bucket. And then when Jordan was on offense, he scored at least 8 or 9 of the 12 buckets every game. And he said he didn't say a word to Don the entire time, just completely locked him up and completely dominated him. And he said that the game ended, Jordan just went on his way, and Don went home. And he said, on my way home, I'm sitting here going, 3.5 weeks ago, I got the best of Michael Jordan, some DS pickup game, and nobody cares, nobody knows. I come back 3 weeks later, play him again, and Jordan sends the message, I'm the best player in the world. This is how it works. You don't do that to me. I mean, that's how competitive Michael Jordan is. Pretty crazy, right?
That's nuts.
And that just kind of opened my eyes to why Jordan is so great. And then I played with Atlanta, and we were playing up in Chicago, and I'm stretching at the court before the game, and Jordan goes, "Psst, young fella." And I turn around and it's Michael, and I'm like, "Oh, hey, Mike." And he goes, "Man, you didn't have to do my heels like that this past year." And I'm like, "Well, they played zone." And that was the game you and I were referencing where I scored 30. And I said, "I didn't think you'd watch that." He goes, "I follow my heels." And he's like, "Hey, happy birthday coming up." And I'm like, "What? You know, we have the same birthday?" So Michael Jordan and I both are born on February 17th. And I didn't realize you knew we had the same birthday. He's like, "I told you I follow the ACC." And I'm like, "Dang, man, happy birthday to you too coming up." And so play the game, and it gets down to the wire, and we're up one. And Jordan has the ball. It's like 25 seconds. It comes down, hits a pull up, and they go up one. Lenny Wilkins calls timeout. We draft up some play. Steve Smith ends up getting fouled with like 6 seconds to go. And he hits 2 free throws to put us up one, and the Bulls call timeout. So Lenny in the timeout says, "Hey, don't let Jordan catch it." And then he says, "But Chucky Brown, you don't face guard the inbound, turn your back. And so if he passes it to Jordan, you run and double team him so we get the ball out of his hands." And so they go out there. Who catches the ball? Michael Jordan. Chucky Brown goes to double him. Jordan splits the double team, pulls up from about 15, shoots it, buzzer goes off, ball goes through the net, end of the game. They win. We lose. Our bench is on the opposite basket as what he just shot at, but the Bulls locker room is by our bench. So he comes running by our bench straight through the tunnel and smacks me on my ass and says, "Happy birthday, young fella," and just ran to the locker room. I was like, this guy's a god.
That's an amazing Jordan story. The fact that he would even know A, who you were, and B, what your birthday is.
I was floored. To this day, I want to message him and say, "Look, man, we share the same birthday. We're 10 years apart. We both are in the ACC. All I want is access to every Jordan shoe drop, Air Jordan 1s that I can get."
Drew, I want to thank you so much for joining me on the I Play 2 podcast today. I appreciate you sharing all your stories on the hardwood with your family and the great Michael Jordan sharing your birthday story. Take care. Thanks so much, and we'll catch up soon.
All right, Rob. Great to catch up, man. It's been too long since our U days. So glad you're doing well, buddy.